Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti o bentornati a Inglese con Amore. Mi chiamo Nancy e sono la vostra English coach. In questo podcast preparo mini lezioni culturali divertenti per aiutarvi ad allenare l'orecchio e migliorare la vostra comprensione dell'inglese parlato. Se durante la giornata non avete molto tempo, i miei episodi sono piccole pillole linguistiche brevi e facili da ascoltare anche con una vita molto impegnata. Sono perfette se vi state preparando per esami di inglese, se volete migliorare l'inglese per il lavoro, oppure semplicemente se studiate per piacere personale. Oggi voglio raccontarvi un breve racconto scritto dall'autore italiano Luigi Pirandello. Pirandello è uno degli scrittori più famosi d'Italia. È nato in Sicilia e nel 1934 ha vinto il Premio Nobel per la Letteratura. Ha scritto romanzi, opere teatrali e racconti che spesso contengono umorismo, ironia e osservazioni molto intelligenti sul comportamento umano. Il titolo della storia di oggi è La Giara, che in inglese significa The Jar. In questa storia la giara è una grande giara di terracotta, cioè un grande contenitore fatto di argilla cotta. È una storia leggera e divertente che parla di avarizia, testardaggine e della vita quotidiana nelle campagne della Sicilia. È anche una storia molto stravagante e fantasiosa che offre un piccolo assaggio della cultura italiana e dell'umorismo tradizionale siciliano. Il racconto originale è stato scritto all'inizio del Novecento, quindi oggi si trova nel pubblico dominio. La versione che ascolterete in questo episodio è stata riadattata in inglese semplice, appositamente per aiutarvi a praticare l'ascolto. Ma prima di iniziare, posso chiedervi un favore. Se vi piacciono questi episodi, iscrivetevi al canale, così riceverete una notifica ogni volta che pubblico una nuova lezione. E condividete questo podcast con qualcuno che conoscete che vuole migliorare il proprio inglese. Il vostro supporto mi aiuta a continuare a creare queste mini lezioni di ascolto in inglese per voi. Allora ragazzi, se siete in palestra o a passeggio con il cane o a fare una passeggiata per allenarvi, mettete le cuffie e allenate il vostro inglese allo stesso tempo. E se invece siete a casa sul divano o in poltrona, preparatevi una bella tazza di tè come piace anche a me, rilassatevi e godetevi questo momento insieme a me. Siete pronti ad ascoltare questo breve e divertente classico italiano adattato in lingua inglese? Allora iniziamo. Our story takes place on the island of Sicily, in the warm countryside, where the hills are covered with olive trees. The sun is strong, the earth is dry and golden, and the air smells of rosemary, oregano, and ripe olives. In this part of Sicily, life was simple, and everyone in the village knew everyone else. In this village lived a very important man named Don Lollò. In Sicily, people often use the title Don before a man's name. It is a sign of respect, usually given to men with money, power, or land. And Don Lollò was exactly that, a landowner. A landowner is a person who owns large pieces of land, fields, farms, olive groves, and rents that land to farmers who work on it and share part of the profit with him. Now Don Lollò had many olive trees, many workers, and many responsibilities, but he had one very strong personality trait. He was stingy. Stingy means someone who hates spending money, even when it is necessary. They hold on to every coin like as if it is the last coin on earth. Don Lollò was that kind of man. One day, Don Lollò decided he needed a new terracotta jar. A terracotta jar is a jar made of baked clay, which is usually reddish or orange in colour. He went to the market to look for the perfect jar, and he found one that was exactly the size he was looking for. It was 1.5 meters tall and very wide, round and smooth. Don Lollò bought it to store olive oil from his next harvest. When he got home with his brand new terracotta jar, something terrible happened. While the workers were putting it in place, a long crack opened on the side and the jar split with a dry sound, like a giant egg breaking. Don Lollò nearly exploded with anger. He had spent money, and remember, spending money hurt him more than a toothache. And now the new jar was ruined. Ruined means severely damaged, destroyed, or made useless. In the village there was a small, clever repairman called Zi Dima, or lo sciancato. In Sicily, Zi comes from the word zio, which means uncle, but people use it as a warm, respectful nickname for older working men. And sciancato means the limping one. So that means that Zi Dima had a limp, which means he walked unevenly with difficulty because one leg was weaker. His slow sideways steps made the whole village call him the limping one, but not in a mean way. It was simply his known nickname. A nickname is an informal name given to a person, and it is typically used instead of or in addition to an official or legal name. Zi Dima was thin, with bright, sharp eyes and a quick mind, and hands that could fix almost anything. But he had a strong personality too. He was stubborn. Stubborn means that once he decides something, nothing can make him change his mind. Not shouting, not money, not pressure. A wall is easier to move than a stubborn man. Don Lollò called Zi Dima to come and repair the crack. Now remember, Don Lollò was a stingy man, which means he hated spending money and always tried to pay as little as possible. And Zi Dima was stubborn, which means once he decided something, he did not like to change his mind. And that was a dangerous combination. Don Lollò offered a very low price for the repair, much lower than the job was worth. He spoke quickly and confidently, as if the price were perfectly fair. Zi Dima looked at the long crack in the jar, then at Don Lollò, and he sighed. He shook his head slowly because he knew the work was difficult and deserved better pay. But Zi Dima needed the work, and in those days, turning down a job, which means refusing or declining a job offer, meant going home with empty pockets. So with a tired little smile, he finally accepted. He placed his tools inside the enormous jar and carefully climbed in after them. The jar was tall and round, and inside it felt cool and hollow, like standing inside a small clay cave. Slowly and patiently, Zi Dima began to work. He tightened the wires, added the glue, pressed the clay, and sealed the long fracture with the hands of someone who had done this kind of work many times before. After some time, the jar was perfect again. Now that the job was finished and the terracotta jar was as good as new, which means it looked and worked exactly like it did before it was damaged, Zi Dima tried to climb out. And then he discovered something awful. The opening of the jar, or the neck, was too small for him to climb out of easily. His shoulders got stuck, his foot slipped, and his elbows jammed awkwardly against the narrow clay rim. Inside the jar, his voice echoed loudly, as if he were calling from inside a cave. "Hey, Don Lollò, I seem to be stuck." Don Lollò ran over, already annoyed and suspicious. "What do you mean, stuck? Come out immediately." Zi Dima tried again, one leg up, one arm squeezed sideways, twisting his body this way and that, but it was useless. The jar would not let him pass. Now here comes the important part. Yes, Zi Dima could probably have forced himself out with enough effort, but at that very moment, inside the cool clay belly of the jar, he suddenly remembered the unfairly low price he had accepted, and then something changed. Instead of struggling, Zi Dima slowly lowered himself back down. Inside the jar, he made himself comfortable. He crossed his arms, he sat down firmly. He even gave a little bounce just to make the jar echo dramatically. Boom, boom, boom. And then, in a calm but determined voice, he said, "I will not come out unless I am paid properly. You must give me more money for this job." And that is when it truly began. The argument, the battle of pride, the clash between Don Lollò, the stingy landowner, and Zi Dima, the stubborn, limping repairman, now officially living inside a very expensive clay jar. From this moment on, it was no longer about the crack. It was about who would give in first. Give in means admitting defeat, accepting that you cannot win or solve a problem. And neither man was ready to surrender. In small villages in Sicily, news travels very fast, and the news about Zi Dima being stuck inside the enormous terracotta jar spread through the village in no time at all. First, the workers arrived, then the children, then the curious neighbours. Soon, half the village was standing around Don Lollò's field, laughing and whispering. What did they see? A giant terracotta jar, and a little old limping man living inside it, like a snail in its shell. Every time Don Lollò shouted, Zi Dima's voice came back twice as loud because of the echo inside the jar. "Pay me what I deserve. Get out of my jar. I can't. You can. I won't." The argument bounced off the clay walls and rang across the field. People laughed until their stomachs hurt. Some suggested pulling him out with ropes. Others suggested breaking the jar. A few boys even suggested turning the jar upside down and shaking him out like a sack of flour. At this, Don Lollò nearly fainted. Damage the jar? Break it? After he had just had it repaired? The thought alone made him clutch his chest. Meanwhile, inside the jar, Zi Dima was surprisingly comfortable. He had absolutely no intention of coming out until Don Lollò agreed to pay him fairly for his work. As evening fell and the sky turned dark, Zi Dima began to feel hungry. From inside the jar, his voice echoed calmly. "If I am to remain here, at least bring me some dinner." So the villagers passed him some bread, salami, and cheese through the narrow opening of the jar. And after a moment of hesitation and much grumbling from Don Lollò, someone even handed him a small bottle of wine. Inside the jar, Zi Dima ate happily. He chewed his food slowly and deliberately. He even sang a loud, cheerful song, his voice echoing triumphantly from the clay walls. The jar had become his little house. Outside, Don Lollò raged, argued, and waved his arms wildly. Inside, Zi Dima celebrated. The more the landowner shouted, the more relaxed and defiant the repairman became. And so the night passed, with one man furious in the field, and the other comfortably installed inside a very expensive clay jar. As night grew darker, the arguments did not stop. Neither man would change his mind. Don Lollò absolutely refused to pay more, and Zi Dima absolutely refused to climb out. The villagers waited, whispering. Some were amused, others were tired, but everyone understood one thing. This was no longer about money. It was about pride. Finally, pushed by frustration, humiliation, and pure rage, Don Lollò lost control. His face turned red, his voice trembled, and his arms waved wildly in the air. And he shouted, "Fine, if you won't come out, you can stay in there forever." Then, in a burst of anger that he would soon regret, Don Lollò gave an order to the workers. Push it down the hill." There was a moment of silence. Then the men placed their hands against the large jar. They pushed, slowly at first, then harder. The jar began to move. It rolled. It gathered speed. It bounced over stones and dry earth. From inside came Zi Dima's voice, no longer calm, no longer triumphant, but terrified. "Stop! Stop! Are you crazy?" The jar rolled faster. It hurtled forward like a massive clay wheel, spinning out of control. Zi Dima screamed from the inside like a man on a carnival ride. And then, crash! The jar smashed against an olive tree and shattered into 1,000 pieces. A cloud of dust rose into the night air. Broken clay scattered across the field. For a second, everything was silent. And then, from the ruins of the jar, dusty and shaken, crawled Zi Dima. He was pale. He was covered in clay. His clothes were torn, but he was free. He slowly stood up, brushed the dust from his jacket, adjusted himself with dignity, and limped forward. The villagers stared. Don Lollò stared. And Zi Dima said calmly, almost politely, "Well, now you certainly don't have to pay me." Then he turned and walked away into the night. Don Lollò stood frozen in the field. He had lost the jar, he had lost the repair, and he had lost the argument. And worst of all, he had lost his dignity. The villagers laughed about it for weeks. And so, in the end, no one truly won. And that is how one crack in a jar revealed 2 cracks in human nature: stinginess and stubbornness. Eccoci ragazzi, siamo arrivati alla fine dell'episodio di oggi. Spero che vi sia piaciuto ascoltare questo divertente racconto di Luigi Pirandello, una storia che ruota attorno ad avarizia e testardaggine, 2 caratteristiche che si possono trovare nelle persone in ogni parte del mondo. Il messaggio della storia è semplice ma molto significativo. Quando l'orgoglio diventa più importante della collaborazione, alla fine non vince davvero nessuno. Don Lollò è troppo avaro per scendere a compromessi, mentre Zi Dima è troppo testardo per cedere. Alla fine la giara si rompe, la discussione esplode ed entrambi se ne vanno sconfitti. È il modo ironico e giocoso di Pirandello per ricordarci che, a volte nella vita, aver ragione non è importante quanto avere saggezza. Se siete curiosi di vedere un piccolo estratto cinematografico di questa storia, trovate il link nella descrizione dell'episodio Ha un video di circa 11 minuti su YouTube. Si tratta di una scena tratta dal film a episodio Questa è la vita, ispirato a 4 novelle di Luigi Pirandello. La scena è diretta da Giorgio Pastina e mostra proprio una parte della novella La Giara. Nel pezzo del film si vede la scena in cui Zi Dima viene chiamato da Don Lollò per aggiustare la sua grande giara, ma l'avarizia di Don Lollò porterà a conseguenze assurde e bizzarre, tutte da ridere, con anche una piccola gioca di sarcasmo. È bello da vedere anche perché è un modo per fare un piccolo viaggio nel tempo e osservare come era la vita in Italia in quell'epoca. Mi è piaciuto molto vederlo anche dal punto di vista culturale e credo che piacerà anche a voi. Dopo aver guardato il video, tornate qui al mio canale e riascoltate questo episodio in inglese. Vi aiuterà a capire e cogliere ancora meglio la storia e a migliorare la vostra comprensione dell'inglese. Se siete nuovi qui e vi è piaciuta la lezione di oggi e volete far parte della community di Inglese con Amore, iscrivetevi al podcast, mettete un like e condividetelo con qualcuno che vuole migliorare il proprio inglese. E lasciatemi anche un commento, mi farebbe davvero piacere leggere il vostro feedback. Thank you for being here with me today. I will see you in the next episode. Until then, my dear friends, I send you all my love.